just learn the things you love, learn the things which I'm most excited by. The problem is there's so much music I love, it's sometimes hard. All the best songs for me that I've written, all my best compositions have come from not something where I've tried to be like, okay, I'm going to write something, but something that's come from an improvisation. When you hear Lester Young or Charlie Parker or Sonny Rollins or Art Tatum, it's not like music is going to be better than that, It's like saying, is Beethoven better than Bach or Mahler better than Beethoven or...
Hello, Tom Ollendorff.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today. You're a guitarist, composer, writer, and tutor at the Royal Welsh College of Music. So you've released 4 albums. A Song for You in 2021, Open House in 2023,
Yeah.
A solo album,
Exactly.
and Where in the World to be released this year.
Exactly.
And you've played with incredible musicians like Haryonik, Tim Garland, and Nitai Erkovitz.
Yes.
And many others.
Yeah.
First of all, can you tell us about how you discovered jazz and which early albums influenced you the most?
Yeah, well, nice to be with you guys. Thank you, and hi to everyone listening. I remember when I was, I guess, 17 or 18, and I, like many guitar players, I had, kind of self-taught background, and so I was listening to lots of rock music and blues, and I guess there was a kind of curiosity like in my mind about feeling there must be a broader kind of musical language than just the blues and that kind of form and rock music, which is often kind of derived from that. And I remember that when I was, I guess, 17 or 18, a friend gave me, it's such a cliche answer, but Kind of Blue. And that was a really nice way in for me to jazz. I remember the track, especially Flamenco Sketches, the way that there's like a solo in like one key and then the key changes. And I started thinking, wow, okay, so you could have like a lot of familiar vocabulary, kind of blues and vocabulary I recognized, but with changing keys. And it really caught my attention. And I listened to that record on repeat for at least a year or two. And then I started getting some guitar tuition from a great guitarist called Guy Harrop. And he introduced me to George Benson. And I remember he was obsessed with George Benson. And so we listened to lots of George Benson records and also just a lot of like live performances of George Benson. You know, I guess the way a lot of people of my generation interact with music is not just through records, but through YouTube and now social media. Back then it was just YouTube. So, yeah, George Benson was, I became really, really obsessed with him. And I guess through the Kind of Blue record, I started checking out, Cannibal Adderley records, other Miles Davis records, started to check out John Coltrane records. And that was really the introduction for me, really, I guess some of the most familiar, some of the most familiar jazz records. But it was only really when I started studying music at music college, and I suddenly began studying, and I was surrounded by lots of really talented, amazing musicians who had an amazing knowledge of jazz, which I didn't really have. And I felt, really out of my depth about, oh my God, I don't know who this person is. And actually I got introduced to a lot of more modern guitar players, So I remember really at the start of studying, checking out Gilad Hexelman and Kurt Rosenwinkel, Lage Lund. And so I had this kind of strange mix of, music from the 1960s, and I guess a bit later with George Benson as well, and then really modern stuff from the 2000s, but not much in between. And then I started to kind of fill the gaps.
So you learned jazz guitar with lessons at first, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was self-taught really till I was 18. I was at a school, I was very lucky that I was at a school where there was lots of music happening. I actually wasn't doing that much of the music a lot of the time, but I was lucky to see other people doing music. My parents both love music. So music was always something which interested me, but I was really self-taught till I was 18. And I guess that I suddenly felt like I needed some help, and it was just by chance that I went for a drink with my dad in this restaurant kind of bar where we were living, and there was this guy playing guitar, fantastic guitar player. And he was playing all these chord shapes and like soloing with all this kind of vocabulary, which I was interested in, but I just didn't know what it was at all. I was like, what are all these chords? What are all these scales? And what are these songs? They sound great. And so I just went up to him and said to him, listen, could you help me? Could I have some lessons? And this was this Guy Harrop, and he was a very kind person and really fantastic guitar player. So yeah, I without him, I guess I would have been really lost, because jazz is such a, of course it's an emotional art form, but there's also an intellectual side to it, which sometimes can, for me anyway, I needed some help to bridge that gap. So yeah, it was his tuition, starting with him, which was really helpful for me.
So he was your first mentor?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my first mentor, and I think one of the best things he taught me was, he helped me a lot learning chord shapes and some some repertoire, but also enthusiasm. He was so passionate about jazz. He would turn up in his white van to my house and get his amp out and his guitar out, and then just be like, oh, check out this video of George Benson. Oh, like, check out this moment. He's like shredding, and he had this enthusiasm, which is infectious. When people are enthusiastic, it's really inspiring. So his enthusiasm and his passion for jazz, as well as he was a fantastic player, were really helpful for me. So I'm really lucky. It was just chance. I found him at the right moment.
Did you have other mentors after that?
Yes. Oh, so many. I think one thing I always reflect on is a lot of the people you learn the most from are people around you, your colleagues. So I've learned, when I started studying, I learned lots from just other people I was studying with. But there were teachers at my the university I studied at who were very helpful for me. So incredible guitarist Dave Cliff, one of the UK's finest jazz guitar players, I think, and Dave has amazing experiences touring with people like Lee Konitz, War Marsh, Nina Simone. So he had a ton of experience, and just great understanding of jazz traditional language. I was lucky to study with him for 4 years, and I still see him sometimes, and we play a little bit. Amazing guitar player, and Richard Jones was another one of my teachers, early teachers when I was studying, and also some mentors who are non-guitar players. The saxophonist Jeff Simpkins was, again, I would consider like a mentor figure, and I play with Jeff sometimes. We're playing in a few weeks. Really taught me a lot about what it means to improvise. And then, later on, I guess other figures, Gilad Hexelman was, I guess in some ways, I feel like a mentor figure a little bit to me. I met him in New York, studying with him, and then got to know him as a person and as well as a musician. I feel I learned a lot from him about how to, just with so many things, actually. It'd be hard to pick, but how to continue to grow as a musician. I feel like I always think this when I used to go to New York and study with him. I'd go and then take a lesson. Then maybe 2 years later, I'd go back and take some more lessons. And I always remember thinking, I've really got better in the last 2 years. He's going to see I've got better. And then I would turn up and he was so much better than the last time, and I felt like, I've barely got better at all. And, very lucky as a guitar player that there are so many incredible guitar players alive at the moment. And so many of my heroes are guitar players who, I can go and see play, and they're continuing to develop and improve as well. So if I go and hear Kurt Rosenwinkel now compared to when I first heard him, to me, he sounds like he's kept expanding and growing, or the same with Gilad, or same with a lot of my musicians. So, I've been lucky to have so many people to kind of look up to, in that way.
Which experiences or encounters have been the most significant in your career?
Well, we were talking just before we started recording about when you first heard me playing with Ari Honig, and I think working with Ari has been really important for me. I learned so many things about music, about professionalism, about practicing and studying from him. not just from playing with him and studying with him. I first met him as a student, like going to New York and studying with him, and then started playing with him a little bit, and I organized some gigs for him to come to the UK and play his music with him, and then he asked me to do some gigs with his band, and we started collaborating like that. And yeah, that was very significant for me because I had to, try and learn to play his music, which was a big challenge, but also just being around someone and touring with someone like that, like such a master of their craft. I think that was very significant for me. Yeah, and a great person, a great character as well. So working with people like that, hanging out with people like that was really impactful. Yeah, so many, like I feel lucky that I've worked with so many great musicians, and it's still, even just like some of my like colleagues and close friends, sometimes I'll just have a play with or a session with them in London, and I'll be like, oh my God, like they're incredible, like friend of mine, really close friend. And we played a gig together a few weeks ago, saxophonist Riley Stone Lonergan. And, he's a close friend, but every time I hear him or we play, I'm just like, this guy is just out of this world incredible. And so those experiences are very significant. It's not, we haven't recorded together or done long tours. We've played loads of gigs, but those experiences are so significant because, you learn so much from your friends, and he's just one example among so many. But yeah, professionally, Ari was very significant for me. The last couple of years, I asked Aaron Parks to play with my group. We did like 10-day tour last year, and then this year we did a couple of dates and made a new record. And again, one of my favorite musicians, and just everything I aspire to be musically, I feel like, or so many of the things I aspire to be musically, he represents. And so when you work with people like that, it makes you, want to be better. I remember we did a tour last year, and I came away from it thinking, I have to get in the practice room, like I have to work, like there's all these things I want to develop musically. And so that was significant for me because I love his music. I love what a great artist he is, So that's been very significant, and it's been very significant with this new record because it's very different to the other albums I've made, and I'm really like proud of it. And I think he played a huge part in that. So yeah, Aaron Parks, working with him for the last couple of years has been significant. Yeah, those are the first things that come to mind. But as I say, it could be, so many people. It's always difficult to talk about your own music or to analyze it, where it comes from. But certainly, like, this is the first time I've recorded my own music with the piano. And when we did this tour last year, I was a little uncertain of even though he was one of my favorite musicians ever, really, I was uncertain of what it would be like playing my own music with the piano. The way I'd kind of built myself as a guitar player was I felt comfortable without the piano, filling the space, the harmony, the melody at the same time, or making it seem like that. And I was quite nervous about having such a strong artistic presence like Aaron fills so much of the music, but he's, he it's just always perfect with him and always feels like the first time. Every gig feels like it feels like the music is fresh, like he's just discovered it, but he really understands it. It's amazing quality. And so it really made me think about what new music to write, I guess. And so, yeah, it's the first time I've done a record just of my own music, and there's some music on it which is different because it's not really improvised. There is improvisation. All the songs have improvisation, and a lot of the songs are kind of more like a traditional jazz format where you play a melody and then you improvise on the form of the melody. But there's also some tunes where we just play a melody and that's it. No improvising in terms of, but then there's improvising with texture and sound. And so there's a couple of kind of what I would call through composed pieces, which kind of serve as introductions for other songs. So that's been different, maybe, I love classical music, and I think this record, I've tried to express that a little bit. Yeah, so it's the first time doing a record of just my own music, and it's a different experience. It's a different. It's kind of scary, because it's just you're putting so much of yourself out there. It's it's. I was very nervous making this record actually, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. Thank God.
So you talked about Harry Honig. You also play with Jeff Ballard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jeff. We're playing tonight in Paris. Yeah.
Exactly, yes. Is it very different to play with these two drummers?
Well, tonight is the first concert with Jeff, actually. So I haven't played with him before. I've known him quite a long time, and we met probably 10 years ago. And I was hanging out with Gilad. Hexman was coming to the UK, and so I was hanging out with Gilad, and I met Jeff then. And so tonight's going to be the first concert with him, actually. And the bass player at the concert tonight, who's Connor Chaplin's been on all my records, and we tour, lots together. And Connor knows Jeff very well, and we kind of talked about the possibility of doing something with Jeff for this tour. It's a really special tour. This is, well, actually 29. There's not 30 concerts, 29 concerts all across the world, and so it's really exciting for me. With so many concerts, it's nice to explore the music with different people. And me and Connor were speaking about it, and Connor said, you should ask Jeff to do some concerts, how much he enjoyed playing with him and how much he enjoys hanging out with him personally. And the times I hung out with Jeff before, I really enjoyed as well. And of course, he's one of my favorite drummers on the planet. And so, yeah, tonight's going to be the first time. So let's see how it goes.
Just to be curious, you never played with him?
No, tonight's the first time we're going to play together.
Not even rehearsal?
Not even rehearsal.
Wow. What about your experience with Tim Garland?
Fantastic, yeah. Absolutely incredible. I think that came about that I had, I guess this is 2 years ago now. I was playing in London, and I think again through Connor Chaplin, had introduced me to Tim, and if my memory is right, I invited Tim to come to the concert this was when my last album launched, Open House, and I invited him to the show in London. I said, Tim, it'd be such a pleasure to have you there. And he said, listen, I'll bring my saxophone. And so he joined me for a couple of songs. I think that's right. And incredible, and amazing. Such an incredible force behind Tim. Tim has so much, his force musically, there's so much power behind it. And he's also very interesting because he has a very broad skill set as a musician in terms of his arranging and composition, and a lot of skills, like particularly the arranging. I don't, those are skills I don't have at all, really. Arranging for orchestra and, string quartet. And so he's an incredible musician, remarkable. And yeah, so Tim, then that concert with Tim was so much fun. Him joining me as a guest was, you always know when there's a reaction in the room, people screaming, and really when he was playing especially. And so I thought we got to do more of that. And so later that year, I think I had a week-long tour in Europe, and Tim joined me for, if I remember, 4 or 5 gigs, and then we also made a recording at his house, which I really like, a duo recording. He invited me to be part of this series of duos he was making. He has a beautiful studio at his place, and again, just another one of those extraordinary musicians with so many skills, so much talent, and very inspiring, and slightly nerve-wracking to be around and working with people like that, because I said just so many incredible skills. So learned so much playing with him, and he's also very different. He has a very different musical personality to some of the other musicians I'd worked with. There's so much music in him. There's so much classical influence, I think, as well as jazz. And again, some of his professional experiences working for so long with Chick Corea, those are amazing things. To work with people like that. I've been really fortunate to work with Tim. And I haven't seen him now for, I guess, a few months, or maybe even a bit longer, maybe even a year, but I'm sure we're going to do more stuff again. Fantastic person and musician.
How was it to work with Ben Wendel on the album Open House, I think?
Yeah, that was a fantastic experience as well. I remember that actually, again, his name has come up so many times, but Gilad Hexelman introduced me to Ben. And, I think he said to me, Ben would sound amazing on your music, or he made this is a long time ago, but this is 5-6 years ago, but, some comment like that. And I thought, well, if one of my favorite musicians is suggesting that or thinking it's a good idea, I should write to them. And so Ben joined me for a tour. From memory, it was just in the UK. And this was in 2022, the spring of 2022. And it's similar like with Aaron, that when I mentioned about how the music kind of went to a new level or something new came out of the music, which wasn't there before. And we had an amazing tour. And so I thought straight away, okay, I got to do something with this, and quickly, because Ben's a very busy guy. And so I invited him back to the UK about, I guess, 7 or 8 months later. And we did just like 4 or 5 dates in the UK. And then we went into the studio. Ben was in the studio just for one day. And then there was trio for the second day. Ben has some incredible qualities. I think his time when he plays, he has this. It's different to the force I was talking about with Tim, actually, but although many things are similar, but there's this kind of physicality and kind of muscularity to his time, and so I remember a few times, and actually it was very funny, but he would sometimes take such an incredible solo that I remember afterwards being like, oh, now I've got a solo, and I remember even a few times just saying, like, on the bandstand during the gig, right, I'm not soloing, Ben sounded too good, and again, an experience where if you're making a record, you want to try and improve, and so I remember working a lot and trying to develop some of those skills, but I remember that being a big moment where I thought, I got to make my time stronger, because if you're playing, if that thing I talked about, Ben takes an incredible solo and the time is so strong, the sound, everything, and then I take a solo and it feels weaker, that's not a good feeling. And it definitely was like that, I felt anyway. And so I worked a lot on that in that period between the first tour and then the second shorter tour and the recording. And he's a great person as well, like another great, great character, great person, very very kind, sweet person, and always, every time I've hung out with him or played with him, it's been a pleasure, and I'm very fortunate because he did a great job on that record. I know I've seen lots of people there's one solo I think on the song Passing Ships, and I've seen so many saxophonists have learned that solo, and his playing really elevated the record, so I'm very grateful for that. And fantastic person. The structure of that song, the beginning is very simple and melodic, and then the end is kind of intense and there's a darker quality, but you need someone. There's not much information. It's, some of my songs, there's a lot of information, but that's very simple. It's just like a simple chord sequence at the end, but there's a kind of dark character, and you rely on someone to do an incredible solo. The song needs that. And so I couldn't have had someone who did bit like I knew he was going to be able to do it, but I kind of relied on that to make the song complete, and so it's amazing playing. It's incredible, totally incredible.
Can you tell us about your current projects?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So this new album, Where in the World, is out November 21st. On Fresh Sound Records, MoCloud in Japan. As I mentioned before, last spring did a 10-day tour, which Aaron Parks joined me for, and then this year in June we just did a couple of nights in London, and then went into the recording studio. And so I'm in Paris with you now, and I've done 7 concerts, I think, or 8 concerts of the tour, and there's still 21 or 22 dates left. I'm playing in Paris tonight, and then going to Italy tomorrow for a couple of days, and then the UK, and then heading to China and Australia and Korea and Germany afterwards. It's a really long tour, and I'm really happy with the record. I haven't had that feeling before in quite this way, where I've been so happy with how the music. It's not that I think it's perfect or anything. It's not, but I know I couldn't have done it better myself. I pushed myself to the limit, and and I'm very relieved and with how it's turned out. And yeah, it was, I'm so lucky that not just Aaron Parks, but James Madron, the drummer James Madron, bassist Connor Chaplin are on that album. Three incredible artists and musicians who the sound of the music is so shaped by them. I of course, to write the music is the biggest thing. That takes a lot of effort, and I spent a lot of time. Even once the music was close to being finished, I spent a lot of time on thinking about the arrangements, structures, everything. I spent more time on this album than anything else I've done. But you give the music to other musicians and you trust them about what it's going to turn into. That, especially in jazz, because there's lots of improvising. There's lots of decisions or musical interactions which shape the sound of the record. And really, some of that was just made at the last minute, like even in this recording studio, we were making little changes, and Aaron or James or Connor would make small suggestions about structure or sound or dynamics. And so I'm so lucky to have worked with them because, yeah, they really helped me, so much, elevate the music to the best it could be. And, yeah, they just, I'm really excited. The first single, which is called Past Lives, came out about 10 days ago. There's a single coming out in a few weeks. And yeah, I'm really excited for the full album to come out. It's really nice that the record label sent me lots of CDs, so I've been managing to share them with people on the tour. So if anyone's coming to any of the concerts there, they can get a CD. But I'm really excited for the full thing to come out in November. And yeah, once a CD comes out or an album comes out, it's the kind of end of something as well as the start, because for this album, I kind of pushed myself in a way in terms of practice and composing, which I hadn't done before in terms of the amount. And so once it's finished and it's released, you kind of let it go, and it kind of floats somewhere, and hopefully people listen to it. But even if they don't, you're kind of letting it go, and it's out of your control in a way, which is nice, and it's just there for other people to listen to. And so I'm really relieved it's come to that moment, and I guess I'm already thinking about what I'm going to record next now, so yeah.
How do you work on your music on the daily life? Do you have a practice routine?
So in terms of practice routine, I would say it's divided into two parts: when I'm touring and when I'm not touring. I'm on tour at the moment, so practice is quite hard to have a regular routine. When I'm touring, it's more about small things. So sometimes there's literally no time to practice. But if there is practice time, normally I just try and do little things for my ears more than anything. And I guess a little bit my technique, my fingers. It's normally just things like playing songs, like playing melodies. So I might take a bebop song, Recently I've been playing, on this tour, been playing John's Abbey by Bud Powell, or Confirmation by Charlie Parker, or just songs like that, which are a little bit tricky technically, or even things like Donna Lee, Anthropology, where there's just some technical element. And then also sometimes I'll kind of revisit an old transcription, an old solo I've done before, and I'll sometimes just play chords on the guitar and try and sing the solo, or try and play the solo, or move into a different key on the guitar. So little things like that when I'm on tour to keep my brain warmed up. I noticed that's actually probably the biggest thing, is the mental state, particularly if you've, like today, I've slept 2 hours before coming here. And so tonight at the concert, it's really important that my mind is kind of fresh, when you're improvising. And so those are the kind of things I'm going to try and do this afternoon before the concert. So that's the tour element. When I'm not on tour, I try and practice a lot. And there's definitely routine. There's definitely things I do regularly. But it's normally shaped by some kind of project. So, for example, the few months before I did this recording, I was working every day on the music, but could be a broad sense. So I'll work maybe on some technical things for the guitar. Could be specific right hand techniques, specific coordination things between the right and the left hand. Specific, I think maybe the biggest thing I work on is specific, what I would call language. So developing my musical language. So ideas for improvising. I try and work on that every day, almost every day. And I think one thing I've learned is to stay for much longer with one idea. I used to practice, 20 different ideas for a short amount of time. And then I'd be like, why am I not getting better at these? Now I realized when you're an improvising musician, for something to be a core part of your language and vocabulary, you have to work at it, repeat it, repetitively. So yeah, the biggest part of my practice is just trying to develop, my language as a musician. And yeah, I mean, I think when this tour is over, I'm going to do another solo recording. So then it will be, there'll be practice, like there'll be probably more technical practice for the, and also sometimes just practicing things like sound and dynamics, like small little exercises where, I might try and play a melody very loud and accompaniment very soft, or vice versa, So I'm always trying to think about sound and timing, trying to work, I go through phases of doing a lot of practice where I'm trying to work on my timing and then kind of forget about it for a little bit and then probably a few months later think, I got to do more work on my timing, So yeah, when I'm not on tour, I practice a lot, and there's a lot of things I'm doing daily and repeating, and I keep a practice journal where I'm trying to revisit specific topics. And yeah.
How did you build your musical vocabulary?
I think at the big, there's a kind of transition phase, which is, it's not linear, it's not a straight line. But when you're studying music to begin with, so let's say the simplest way of putting it is when I started studying music at music college. Of course, before I was already developing a language by, learning rock guitar solos or blues. But when I started studying university, I had teachers saying to me, you should learn these things, so you should learn these solos, or you should learn these songs. And of course, those are my first, those are the first foundations of building my own vocabulary. And then I guess now it's more shaped by just what I want to do. So now I just try and find the things that I'm most excited by or move me the most and try and learn them, and I think that just the key bit is trying to, if you want to develop develop your musical language, is a little bit like the thing I said before, understanding that you've got to repeatedly work at it. And so now the exciting thing is, and sometimes it's scary, but is just learn the things you love, learn the things which I'm most excited by. The problem is there's so much music I love, it's sometimes hard to work out where to start, and that can be the most difficult thing. So many options, sometimes it's hard just to make a decision, but yeah, just I guess over a long period of playing guitar every day and learning things I love, you begin to develop your own ideas and your own philosophies, and yeah, that process is continuing. I hope it never stops, really. I hope it's how it always is.
How important is a transcription in your work? And do you have a method, like, for example, do you write down the solos, etc.?
I think that's such a great question. And the reason I love that question is some of my favorite musicians, I've heard they don't transcribe. For me, I go through phases. At the moment, I've been transcribing more, actually. Particularly since I finished this record in June, I've been transcribing quite a lot. And actually just sometimes revisiting old solos. So for me, it's been really important because it's been just like I told you guys before we started the interview, that I've been learning French. I'm terrible, but it's a disaster. But when I'm trying to get better at it, I'll listen to a French podcast, and And sometimes I even, I'll learn if it's a short podcast, I'll learn it by memory, and that's kind of like transcribing, it's like learning something by memory. I don't write it out now. I did used to write out everything, but the problem is I would spend a lot of time writing it out, and it's not really the point. The point is the sound and hearing the music. Of course, writing it out can be helpful. It's not like it's a bad idea in principle, but now I never write it out. It's all about, can I memorize it? Can I sing it? So trying to do a lot more singing. Like, there's just a solo I've been listening to and working on the last few weeks, and I've just been, I would say, singing it as much as playing on the guitar. On guitar, there's a specific challenge, different to other instruments, which is, and I'm sure any guitar players listening to this will this will resonate with them, that if you play one idea in one place on the neck and you move up the neck, the same idea has a totally different fingering. So on guitar, there's this specific challenge, which is you have to try, if there's a sound, let's just use the phrase, I don't like this phrase much, but let's say there's a lick or a melody idea you like from a solo. If I want to play it, let's say it's in the key of B flat major. If I want to play it on the 3rd fret, or on let's say on the 8th fret, the fingering could be totally different. But when I'm improvising, I really need to be able to express that sound in both those places. So a lot of the time what I do is taking my favorite ideas from solos and sing them, and also learn how to express them across the neck of the guitar, with the aim that when I'm improvising, it will kind of be fluid, and I'll be able to, these sounds will be in my head. I'm not thinking about them, but they'll be part of my vocabulary, and certainly when I'm teaching, that's something I think probably discuss the most with students, is how to work on transcriptions and how to build your melodic vocabulary. I do think in some ways you could do it without transcribing, because I think if you just listen to music so much, you would begin to get those sounds in your ear, and then you could, in some ways, depends a bit on the individual, sit down and just explore yourself until you find those sounds. But for me, it was always easier to do it by transcribing, Maybe I just don't have the talent to do that, so I needed to transcribe to get the sounds, Particularly in jazz, where I remember going from a rock background to jazz, there's suddenly all this chromaticism or tension and release, which just isn't there at all in rock music, or most of the time anyway, or blues music. So I needed to transcribe to get it into my ears. For me, that was essential. I think some musicians, they probably have a talent that they almost don't need to do that. But they just being around the music, they absorb it and then find their way to express it themselves. But for me, transcription's always been important. But it's just phases. I do a lot, then I'll leave it for a while, and then I'll feel, I want to investigate this, and so I'll come back to it.
When you play a phrase on different place, you have a different fingering,
right,
but also a different sound.
Yes.
So
right.
How is it conscious when you improvise to play a phrase to have the sound of the bigger strings, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think when you're improvising, you're trying to be as not unconscious. That's definitely not the right word. But you're not trying to think about those things. Improvising. Honestly, for me, it's very similar to the way I compose at the beginning of a composition. Normally, the start of a composition for me is always coming from an improvisation, So the melodies I find, all the melodies on this record, all the songs, like the key melodies, they're all things I improvised when I was just playing the guitar. Then there's this process of arranging the composition to finish it, or intellectualizing the idea and thinking, this is how I'm going to finish. But all the best songs that I've written, all my best compositions have come from not something where I've tried to be like, okay, I'm going to write something, but something that's come from an improvisation. And so I think when you're improvising, you have to have it has to be coming from some kind of vocabulary or sound that you have an understanding of. And so, of course, there can be moments when you're improvising of like revelation, where you find something brand new you've never done before, but it's more in general, for me anyway, like being creative and spontaneous with ideas that you have an understanding of. And that includes, and that's a great point, and guitar players don't talk about it enough, but the different sound that if you play a melody starting on the G string, or you go up and you play it on the A string, how different it could sound, or the D string, or whatever, And those things are all, again, part of your unconscious or subconscious, approach, not unconscious, subconscious approach to improvising. If you work on those things for a long period in the practice room and you think, this sounds different in this register, and sometimes it can just be from, let's say you're learning a bebop melody. Confirmation's a really good example of that, actually, the Charlie Parker song. I remember I used to play that starting on the D string of the guitar. Sorry, this is nerdy for people on the 7th fret. And then I suddenly realized there's no clarity. There wasn't enough clarity to the sounds. I just moved it right down to start on the 2nd fret of the G string, the next string up. And there's much more clarity, And it's just a bit clearer. And I guess if you take that approach when you're learning melodies, that approach will then also, seep into your improvising approach. It's like, this is how I hear the music. This is how it should sound. And of course, it's a long-term thing. It's a constantly evolving thing as well, But it's good. It's great you pointed that out, because I think that's it's also improvising with sound. Maybe sometimes when I'm improvising, I want to play really quietly for a moment. Like at the start of this tour, the first week of it, I was playing with the fantastic drummer Francesco Ciniglio, who's based in France, and I love one thing that really stood out to me, on top of the fact that he everything is incredible with him. To me, amazing swing, time, sound, but to me he had a very interesting use of dynamics, like as an accompanist. So sometimes there would be real changes in dynamics when he was playing, like under my solos, as well as in the melodies, and that's so interesting to play with. But I think that's how he hears the music, That's and I'm sure that's something he's thought about, and so for me that helped me, because it helped me to, it made the music different. It made the music go in new directions, and I thought he was really strong on that. So dynamics, sound, space, all those things are part of improvising, not just the melodies. The rhythm. Rhythm is more the rhythm and the feel is more important than the notes. So those are other things you work on. When you do a transcription or you're trying to develop your language, the way it's played and the way it feels when you play is more important than anything. Some of my favorite solos are Lester Young solos. There's no chromaticism often. It's not like it's in no way simple, but it's it's definitely in some ways harmonically simpler than other solos I've learned, but it feels incredible. And so that's, the biggest part, or one of the biggest parts of developing a musical language, is what's it actually going to feel like when I play. You can have all these ideas, but if it doesn't feel good, it's kind of meaningless. I love John Mayer. To me, John Mayer plays the same blues ideas as like 99% of other guitar players, but when he plays them, or Stevie Ray Vaughan plays them, or B.B. King plays them, they feel great. And so I've thought about that. I've thought about guitar players like him a lot over the last few years, about how just play one simple phrase and it can it can make the hairs stand up on the back of your neck, So those aspects are all essential to improvising.
Do you think one should work what they are at ease with, or what they don't really like?
Great question. That's a question I find myself tackling myself, and also when I'm I teach at several places, and I guess that's something which is really hard to know exactly how to answer. Part of me feels like it really depends a little bit on the individual. Every person is different in their own character. I would say in general that you have to be driven by what you love to do with music. But that doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that there aren't things that you have to then practice. Like, I guess, like, for example, if I had a student and they were incredibly passionate about playing like let's say Guthrie Govan, who I think is a fantastic guitar player. And then I had another student, and they were incredibly passionate about playing like Jim Hall. To me, Guthrie Govan and Jim Hall are both great improvisers, And so I wouldn't say to the student who loves Guthrie Govan, like, you can't do that. Like, you got to do this. What I would encourage them is to make sure they checked out the full depth and the like entirety of what a great musician like Guthrie Govan has, So great timing, great improviser, great feel, great sound, great like harmonic ease. You could say all those same things about Jim Hall. Guthrie Govan has the one thing that would be different about them is how crazy his technique is compared to Jim Hall. Jim Hall solos aren't hard to play in terms of technique; they're hard to make feel good, right? But those qualities are the same for both musicians, really. And so it's all about learning the things you like and then trying to learn them in a way which you're going to see how they would overlap with other great musicians. There is also, of course, the point that let's say I have a jazz guitarist who's a student. There are things which, if you want to be a working musician, which you do need to tackle, and learning repertoire. And so learning repertoire, I guess to some extent, so learning repertoire, feel, time, having those strong feel, those things are really important. But it's not like there's one way of having strong time. To me, Guthrie Govan has incredible time. John Mayer has incredible time. Brad Melder has incredible time. Sonny Rollins has incredible time. So it's not like there's one way it has to be done, but you've got to make sure you try and do it in a way where you're trying to be as complete as possible, and then there is this other side, which is, as I said before, if you're trying to be a professional jazz musician, then you do need to think about there has to be some aspect of thinking about what your working life's going to be like, so if you want to do gigs, it's not like every gig you do is going to necessarily be artistic, so maybe you are going to have to know jazz standards and and hopefully you're going to be passionate. For me, I was always very passionate about learning those things. It wasn't my only passion, but I was very passionate about that. But yeah, it's also, there's lots of time. You don't have to tackle everything in one go. That's why I think you have to follow what you love, because what you love changes. Your taste changes over time, and so it's not that you have to. If someone comes into music college and they're obsessed with playing like Charlie Christian, I wouldn't say to them, okay, but you need to learn how to play in 7/8 now, because you might be asked to do that in a gig in 10 years' time. Let's see, then maybe they'll be passionate about that in the future, But it's about tackling the things you're passionate about now in the most meaningful way possible. The thing is that there's so much music, and music should be something enjoyable. It's music's a wonderful addition to all of our lives, and so it's of course that doesn't mean you shouldn't work hard. And I've definitely been things that I've practiced which have not always been. Like let's say there was a long period where I did a lot of practice with the metronome. In some ways, that's not the most fun thing always, but what you have to see is how that's helping you to become the musician you want to be, and how it's helping you to play the music you love. That's the way of trying to see it. But yeah, you shouldn't be like, I don't think anyone should be forced to learn things they don't like to learn. There's so much music out there. There's no need to do that. There's endless possibilities of what, particularly as a jazz musician, what that means now. There's all kinds of jazz where I feel like I can play it a bit, but like for example, if I was, particularly as we're here in Paris, the Manouche tradition, I mean, of course, like if I went and played a gig like that, I could play the songs, but and I can play, but I don't, that's a different world to me, but it's still kind of under the jazz umbrella, or there's people playing incredibly complex, whole mix or fusions of music, and I don't know. So there's so much music out there for people to enjoy. I think you've just got to follow your passion and do that as best as you can,
What role does singing play in your musical practice?
mean, at the moment, it's a lot just singing like solos or musical ideas. So if I'm practicing like a specific, let's say, a specific melodic idea, yeah, sometimes I'll just play a chord on the guitar, and I'll just try and sing the idea, or I'll just sing a bit walking down the street. I also actually recently have been the last few years more. If I learn like a standard, like a jazz standard, try and I don't want to make out that I always do this because it'd be a lie. I don't, but definitely for some songs I've like learnt the words and just sing along with great singers. I'm not a great singer. I'm a terrible singer, but it's just a nice way of connecting to the music, and also in a way it's kind of it's just the same as singing along with like a pop song in the car. It shouldn't really be any different. It, like when I listen to, like recently I've just been listening to, just found this song I love called I Wish I Knew, and I just listened to I think this is the original version, Harry James Orchestra with Kitty Callan, who I'd never heard of before until a few weeks ago, and I've just been loving just listening to that and singing along with it, walking down the street, or in the car or whatever, just because it's great. It's just, to me, like it's the same as like listening to the Beatles or something. It's to me, it's music I want to sing along with. So yeah, there's some part which is just not even thinking about it being practiced. And then other things where it's a bit more specific. It's like, okay, this is a complex melodic sound, or quite complex melodic sound. Can I really hear what this sounds like? So I'll see if I can sing it. And often I can't, That's quite a nice way of saying, okay, is it more than just the shape under my fingers? Is it also the sound in my ear,
Do you sing all your solos?
No, I don't think I should say I'd sing all of them. It depends a bit on the solo, actually, to be honest. There's this Blue Mitchell solo I've just been kind of revisiting. That's quite easy to sing. Although there's little nuances which are hard to sing, little chromatic nuances or trills which are, kind of trumpet-specific things which are a little hard to sing. But it's quite easy to sing, But then there are other solos I guess I've learnt before which would be really, really hard to sing, but maybe it'd be good to do it. It can't hurt. It's connecting yourself with the music is in any way, like, and singing could be one of those. Is always a good thing. I definitely don't do it for everything though. No.
Sometimes we hear you sing just a little bit
yes.
on the records or
on live.
Yeah. Does it mean you hear what you play before? Always, I mean.
No, I don't think it always means that. It actually, singing at gigs is, or on recordings. On this recording, it's funny because Aaron Parks also sings when he plays. Although his singing sounds nicer than mine. He has this it's very charming. Mine sounds horrible, I think. But it's funny because there's one track where we're both singing quite loudly, and I was thinking afterwards, like, wow, this is like, particularly with me, this is quite a lot. With him it sounded lovely. But I think that singing comes from many different reasons. Sometimes I sing if I'm uncomfortable. Actually, it's not always because. To me, particularly when I'm playing like a melody and soloing, I want it to be like a singer. Like, I want it to have that quality. Like, when you hear someone sing a song, it's above the music. But, when you hear a great singer singing, you're like, let's see, I was just listening to Ella Fitzgerald. And another song I've just been enjoying called Why Was I Born? The way she sings the first like phrase of the melody, it just makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. It's so emotional, feels incredible, and I want that's the aim anyway. It's probably not, but I want when I play a melody or when I solo for it to have that quality. Like, you can just play one note, but so sometimes when I sing, I think it's because I'm almost trying to make that happen. I'm feeling uncomfortable. Sometimes it's also just happening without realizing, and it's very much like. I guess I'm hearing what I'm playing, and it's all just happening at the same time,
Do you still practice classical guitar, and does it influence your jazz playing?
Yeah, I do. I haven't been doing as much lately. Just haven't had the time, but I would say the biggest thing it influences is just my musicianship, which then affects my jazz playing. So we were talking before about, you made a great point about dynamics. Let's say tonight at the concert, I'm going to play a ballad, you know. I think that I won't be thinking about it, but my study of classical pieces, actually more often piano pieces, which I've adapted for guitar than classical guitar pieces. But the study of those things, I think, has definitely shaped the way that I want to play music. So particularly like thinking about when I'm playing a melody, can the sound of the melody be different to the sound of an accompaniment part? So thinking about color, you know, or dynamics. Can the melody be louder, you know? Those things, if you're a classical musician, you spend so much time working on. For me, I feel a bit dishonest in a way because I've thought about those things and I've practiced those things, but compared to a classical musician, not nearly as much. Maybe it's just that for guitar or in jazz, those things aren't discussed so much. So maybe, maybe it feels more important than it actually is, you know. But in terms of me talking about it, but that's the thing it's shaped the most is sound and the way I want the music. When I play the guitar, the way I want it to sound more than. There are little things where it has like harmonically and composition wise, I would say there are things where, you know, it has, you know, I've taken ideas that I like, or if I, you know, sometimes if I like, I'm trying to think of good, like I've just been really, really listen to on repeat. This is actually just a few weeks ago, but Bruckner's Fourth Symphony, the end of the symphony, the last few minutes, I had heard it before, but for some reason I hadn't really engaged with it, and I just became obsessed with this ending of the symphony. So, you know, I'll just work out what the chords are, but, you know, like kind of, I'm not working out an incredibly detailed like arrangement of every part, but just the kind of overall harmonic movement, almost like it's a lead sheet for a jazz song. And so, you know, I guess if you do that a lot, it ends up impacting your composition. I'm never really thinking about, okay, I want to write a song like this. It's not that, but it's more if you do it a lot and those sounds become part of your musicality. So I guess it has impacted probably my composition, but the biggest thing is just sound and technique, you know. I think that's had a big impact on.
It also maybe helps you to work on your solo guitar arrangements, maybe.
Yeah.
Because on classical guitars there is,
yes.
Like for example, I saw you play a Schubert
yes.
impromptu.
Yes. Yeah.
So I guess it must help you for that.
Yeah, that one I talked about so much. That Schubert impromptu, I talk about that a lot when I'm teaching. Actually, that was a very clear example of thinking about how I had to play the piece. I mean, I don't even want to say I played it well, because when you listen to Murray Pariah or you know, Martha Argerich play it or whatever, it's you know, I can't even talk about myself playing it. But you know, when I was practicing the piece, I realized that unless I could make the accompaniment very soft and the melody really loud, well, not loud, but really singing above the accompaniment, it just wouldn't sound right at all. So I spent like a few weeks just on this one pattern with the right hand, you know, but until it was so soft but consistent. And so, yeah, you know, that of course had an impact when I play, as I said, like particularly when I'm playing like, you know, in a trio setting where I might play a melody and accompaniment together. That's helped my technique because I can, you know, play a melody and then play an accompaniment part softly underneath, you know. So that's definitely had an impact, I think. And yeah, you know, when I'm playing solo guitar, it's a similar kind of thing. You know, it's those, when you're playing solo, your musicianship is so closely under the microscope. And so if you have, you know, broad use of dynamics or a few different sounds or, you know, different colors you can make from the guitar, those things all help your performance and they're noticed more. It's easier to miss those things if you're playing with a trio, you know, like there's other sound, it can be loud, you know, or particularly with quartet or whatever, you know. But when you're playing solo, all of that is under the microscope, you know, and so it's definitely helped me with that, yeah. I love playing solo guitar, and I'm obsessed with this idea of doing a new solo recording because I've been working a lot. I wanted to do it last month. In the end, I just didn't quite have time to do it. I was quite busy after this recording with some other projects, and so, but I prepared or thought about a lot of new ideas for it. And one of the tricks is just I played a couple of solo shows last month as well, and I've got a few solo shows on this tour. One of the tricks is, can you just play very simple things, like really simple? If you play a whole hour or an hour and a half set of music, you want to have different things, And one of the things I realized is, fine, there might be some more complicated things, but can I just play just like a basic G major chord on the guitar, and make that feel good, Just the most basic, like just a G major triad. Can I have that as like an accompaniment part, and can it be nice sound, good time? And then if I add a melody on top, perfect, and or if I just play the chord by itself, maybe that's enough, so so having good sound and all those kind of things is crucial for that, because then you can play simple things and it can feel good, and again, like in the jazz world, because there's so much, like often there's complexity in the music. So when you do a solo concert, when I do a solo concert, there's a lot of things I think, oh, okay, I want to express this idea or this idea, or, I want to be working on this. But often if you hear, like, I just watched a video of B.B. King playing solo yesterday, and he was just sitting in his dressing room, like, just kind of playing like kind of playing the kind of dun, 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 and then kind of adding, like, in the spaces, he'd add little blues licks. But it didn't sound empty, even though it was just him. It sounded amazing. It sounded absolutely fantastic. On this kind of acoustic guitar, that could be one song in a solo set to me, Like, he's not doing two things at once. He never played the chord and the melody at the same time, like we play chord melody in jazz. It was improvised, but it was familiar vocabulary, but it felt amazing, And so that would influence me as much as classical music, It's like, because or some folk guitarists, like, or bluegrass guitarists, they'll have these incredible, like, right hat or like picking patterns and these amazing things. It's all composed, but it feels amazing, So all those things have been, and if you go on YouTube now, I was watching this guy last night, this Australian guy, Alan. Have you come across this guy, Alan? I don't know how to say his surname, Alan Gagol. He has this one track called Delicious Monster, which actually it's a beautiful song. It's his least remarkable track technically, but he's just doing these kind of things on the guitar. I've never seen anybody play like this, even close, really. It's totally groundbreaking, crazy. So all those things influence me for the way I play solo, as well as all my favorite jazz musicians,
Do you improvise differently on stage than you do in the studio?
That's a really good question. Wow. Yes, I think so. Probably a little bit. For me, the studio is always, well, not always, but is normally a bit stressful, and there have been recordings I've done where I felt quite relaxed, actually. But I think, I guess when I listen to recordings of myself, but like this album, when I'm doing the mixing and mastering, I had to listen back to it, like a billion times, So I got quite sick of hearing my solos. But I probably think in the studio, I probably try and. It's difficult because I definitely am not thinking about it when I'm doing it, but I probably try and. I don't want to say play more simply, but I guess maybe I do take slightly less risks, like, and because of that, probably there's a few less mistakes, like when I listen to myself, if I have a recording from a gig, and there's like a few mistakes in this, like, or I like try something, it doesn't work or whatever, I don't really care, it's not a disaster. But in the studio, if you make a record and it's there forever, that kind of hurts. It shouldn't hurt either. It should just be normal, but that's my own like stupid point of view on it. But yeah, so I guess maybe when I go into the studio, I probably try and refine the ideas I have into a more clear way, and I mean, yeah, it's just a difficult environment to improvise in, really, like this recording was the most stressed I ever felt about doing this new album, because I'd practiced like just so really hundreds and hundreds of hours in the run up to the recording, and I remember on the day of the recording I wasn't feeling that great either, because like I think this was just stressful, honestly, because I knew it could be really good, but I felt like the one thing that was maybe going to not make it good was me, because the other guys were sounding incredible, and I could feel I was like, we did 2 gigs the night before, and I could feel I was tense and worried about it. And of course, if you're thinking like that, it's hard to improvise, you know? So I guess in the studio, I just thought to myself, okay, you got to just be as clear and as strong as possible, always, you know? And maybe on most of there's a few tracks where actually, to be honest, I actually think I probably do feel like I'm taking risks, and it's a little bit messier. But in general, I'd say I'm just bit more, maybe try and be more concise, you know, and just always prioritize clarity over anything else, you know.
Do you have a method when you learn a new standard? Like, for example, melody first, chords first?
So now it would always be, if it's like an American songbook composition, then I'll always listen to someone singing it, because it's a song, there's words, you know. So like I mentioned with this song, I Wish I Knew, just listen to I listened to that first version. I'm trying to think if I listened to anyone else. Oh, there's a Frank Sinatra version I listened to. I didn't quite capture the mood for me. So I think I try and find a version which I like resonates with me emotionally, like that I feel captures the spirit of the song. And yeah, like for some of my favorite standards like that, or For All We Know, or Autumn in New York, or even obvious ones, All the Things You Are, those kind of things. Yeah, listening to people sing, you know, and listen to great versions of people singing. And then, yeah, like once you have that, it's everything is easier, because you know you like the song, you know what it sounds like in your head already, and so you're just kind of filling in the blanks. If it's like a you know, like let's say I mentioned some of those songs earlier, like Confirmation or those bebop melodies, I found that I have to keep working at those for years. Like if I don't play them, I'll forget little corners. And so some of those things are, you just have to be very diligent, you know, about, yeah, again, I'll listen to different versions to the head, normally try and find the original version, you know, because it's a bit like Chinese whispers sometimes, like things change or little notes change. Sometimes it's hard to work out what the definitive version of the song even is, you know, like, particularly, you know, there've been so many songs like that, like Round Midnight, for example. I remember, you know, I recorded that for a solo album, and I was trying to investigate so many different versions. In the end, I was like, what's even the original version? Even Monk plays it differently on different recordings, you know? So just listen to as many different versions as possible and becoming as informed with the song. But then also having the songs I know really well are songs I've spent time with by myself, you know? Like, of course, it's good to listen to other people's versions, but at some point, you also want to spend a lot of time with the song yourself, finding ways of expressing the harmony of your instrument, or ways, yeah, like different ways of like arranging it, or and yeah, the songs, as I said, the songs I know really well are ones I've really put a lot of time in, just playing them, you know, by myself, finding ideas I like, finding ways of playing the harmony or different, you know. But normally it comes from listening to begin with, you know, and then taking it from there.
How do you work on your tone?
I think this is something which is constantly evolving, but I think I always have a vision of what I want the music to sound like on the guitar. And it's something that does change, and it could sometimes be inspired by, like, let's say I listen to Ella Fitzgerald sing a melody. Maybe I want to try and express some of the vibrato in that same way. And so that's why, you know, or, you know, some notes being brighter and other notes darker, you know, so it's something which I guess does change as my tastes change and develop. But I think I always have a vision of how I want the guitar to sound, you know, like how I... and there would have been a long time where I was working a lot on my sound, particularly working on classical pieces, you know. There's one Debussy piece I really practiced for 3 or 4 years, to be honest, not in a row, but there was a period where for a year I practiced it, like, or 6 months, or like a year I practiced it, like, not every day, but there was a period where I practiced it every day, you know, and I was working so much of the control, like, could I get consistently the same sound and evenness, and, like, you know, if I wanted to make one bit louder and one bit softer or one bit brighter, or, you know, that I felt I could trust myself to do that, you know, in the moment when playing it, you know. So I guess some of those classical pieces have been really important for that, actually, to be honest. But yeah, I think I've always had an idea of how I wanted the guitar to sound, and then it's just about practicing and trying to make it, trying to express what you're hearing in your head.
How do you choose the musicians you play with?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, there's a mix of pragmatic and creative things. I would say the primary thing is, I would say the first thing in general would be people who live in the same city as me. But that's for this tour. That's not always the case, But that would be, so proximity, and people I can meet up with and play with, would be, so that would be the first thing. And at this point, I'm really lucky because, Connor, for example, and there's a great bass player in Paris, Victor Nyberg, another great bass player in London, Will Sash. Those are all people who played my music. A lot of them know my music by heart, actually, so they don't even need the scores for it. And so, or not much anyway. So at this point, I'm really lucky to have great musicians who know the music. And I guess, so, sometimes in the beginning, it was, I obviously asked them to play because they're amazing musicians, but they were amazing musicians who lived, near me and I think the quality of those musicians and the, musicians who I want to work with I would say the main thing is strong timing, strong rhythm, timing, for especially if it's trio with bass and drums. That's like absolutely essential. Those are the biggest things, and also people who I felt like aesthetically, would do a good job with my music, and people who kind of would understand me, understand what I'm trying to do, because there's lots of incredible musicians who I could ask and it would be fantastic, but maybe I wouldn't ask them because I would feel like aesthetically it's not so much their thing. And so some of it just comes down to, do you think people would enjoy it? And also, do you think people are going to be fun to hang out with, And all those people I mentioned so far, they're all people who, it's a pleasure to hang out with them. And you learn a lot from the, just as I said right at the start, you learn a lot from people like that, and then also, I wanted to push myself. And so, and all those musicians pushed me, but working with, having Aaron on the album, for example, or I talked about Ben Wendel before, or those things, of course, playing with musicians like that makes you want to improve because you hear them, they hear how they interpret your music, or you hear how they play a jazz standard at a gig you do, whatever. And you're like, wow, okay, I really want to, if I'm going to be here on the bandstand with them, I don't want to be letting everyone down, So some of it's also a way of finding the right people, and also the right people who can challenge you, and help you improve.
How do you deal with stage fright?
It's been quite a long time since I've had stage fright, like proper stage fright. But it's true that I would say that it happens to me fairly often. I could feel a bit uncomfortable on a gig if the sound's not quite right, or I don't know. The most effective ways I've found have always been looking up at the other musicians, and just looking at the drummer or the double bass player or the piano player, and just remembering you're with other people, and it's a communicative thing. Also, one thing I like is trying to look or engage with the audience in some way. Because it's a concert is different from a rehearsal. To me, one thing I've noticed is how much I often enjoy playing in the sound check. It's because it's so relaxed, and sometimes I feel so relaxed. I've known this happens to me often, that I feel very comfortable in a sound check. Like I feel I can express myself, and then it comes to the gig and there's little tensions. Maybe other people are a bit tense as well, and I can't quite relax in the same way. And so I've noticed that sometimes looking up at the musicians, and just also remembering there's an audience there that you're expressing, you're trying to express yourself to them, that can be helpful. Then the one caveat with looking up at the other musicians is if you're playing a solo gig, then there's nothing to do except for then remembering, trying to hear your performance in its context with the audience, and just trying to embrace the moment of what you're doing. But I don't want to pretend like I'm amazing at that. I actually find that quite difficult sometimes, and it's not something that I've thought several times during this tour so far, wow, I need to address this a little bit, like making sure that I'm really focused, but not focused like thinking a lot, but just my mind is clear on the stage, you know, not thinking about this or worrying about that, you know. But yeah.
Do you recommend your students to practice with a metronome, and how?
Okay. Metronome, I think in general, yes, at some point. I think what is really important is that if you are going to practice with a metronome, that you're not practicing it and you're relying on it. Having the metronome, I say the general piece, it's a big topic, this. The one general piece of advice would be, unless you cannot play in time at all, as long as you've got reasonably good timing, to play and just have the metronome there as a way of checking if you're in time. So maybe bigger spaces between the metronome, not on every beat, for example. And maybe another thing I think is maybe record yourself playing with the metronome. Like record yourself and see what it sounds like, and then record yourself playing without, you know. I think I think it's really important to play without a metronome as well, you know, like both are really important. But I've done a lot of work with the metronome over the years, and it's really important. Now I don't do it so much, but so I would definitely recommend it. And yeah, the key thing is making sure that the metronome is not propping you up, but it's just checking you if you're in time, you know.
What do you think about practicing with play-alongs or backing tracks?
I think it's good. Yeah, I mean, I don't do that much, but I think I don't see any reason why it's not good. I mean, as part of playing, you know, I guess there would be a thought which would be, if that's all you do and if that's the only playing you're doing, it's going to feel very different when you play with a band, you know. And that's one thing which is one of those lessons which I guess we all have to learn. I've had to learn, is that you can't practice something and like copy and paste it and then copy it and then paste it on the gig. And I think if you just play along with backing tracks, it's hard to sometimes appreciate that the gig is its own moment. But definitely as part of practice, great. And that's all because it can also be fun to do it. You know, if you're working on a solo, you play along with a backing track, I think it's great. I think it's also really good to do that without the backing track. Again, it's a bit like with the metronome, to make sure that when you're playing something by yourself, like let's say you're improvising on a song or you're playing a transcription, that it's strong enough by itself that you don't need anything. You're almost the whole orchestra, the whole band. But there's no reason why doing those things are bad at all. I think it can be a great part of your playing and practice.
How do you structure your solos?
That's a good question. That's a hard question. I wouldn't say that I have a uniform method, you know, like a uniform structure that I go to. I'm sure there is something there that I do. You know, it's not like, for example, there's that traditional thing with Wes Montgomery. We'll do like, you know, a chorus of lines, a chorus of octaves, a chorus of chords, you know. Or, I don't have a structure like that. And I've lately been thinking about how a solo doesn't always have to have the same structure. Like it doesn't always have to build, for example. Maybe it can be start really with a bang and then maybe it can get quieter somehow, you know. I guess the most common way is I would start and it would build, you know, in terms of maybe leave more space at the beginning. But the thing is, it's so difficult to answer that question because there's so many scenarios. You might have one chorus to solo in a large ensemble where you just have a short period of time to express your ideas. You might have like in a setting like, for example, tonight's concert trio, it's lots more space, so I might have longer solos, and so then maybe I'll think about how I can leave more space and shape the solo, the you know, the structure of the solo, the form of the solo, the story of the solo. So it's so situational dependent, you know.
How do you teach accompaniment?
Accompaniment? Listen to great accompanists. And I think accompaniment is about rhythm. That's something I think so many of my favorite players, I've heard them say that. It's the rhythm of what you're doing. So if you listen to Wynton Kelly, for example, or Peter Bernstein, another one of my favorite accompanists, the rhythm of what they're doing is just as significant, probably more significant than the actual notes, than the specific voicing. Of course, those things are also very significant. The way the experience of the way you choose a chord, the way you voice lead, the way you place a chord underneath the solo so it doesn't clash again. Those things are obviously huge, but the biggest thing you can do is just listen to great accompanists. And I often show, because I studied this video myself, there's a video of Mulgrew Miller, the great piano player, talking about comping. And if you just type in Mulgrew Miller comping to YouTube, he's wearing an orange jacket and he speaks a bit at the start. That's all I can remember. But he just plays a blues and it feels so incredible. I could just listen to him comping all day, to be honest. So I always, tell people to check out stuff like that. Just listen to the way great accompanists fit into a band and the rhythm of what they're doing. The way accompanists, another thing is the way I remember once playing with Bill McHenry, and he said to me, when you're comping, listen to the drummer. Listen to, try and connect with the drummer, try and comp with the drummer, don't get in the way of what I'm doing, just connect with him, and that was the great Jeff Williams on drums, and that was, I guess I was getting a bit distracted by thinking I got to play fit with Bill, but it kind of was better just to try and make a strong rhythmic sound with the bass and really especially with the drums, so that's another really important aspect.
How can we keep the tradition of oral transmission today, when a lot of things are written down or online,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think I would say the reason to keep it and to celebrate it is that's the best way to learn. That's the most rewarding way and probably the most meaningful way to learn. Music it's not about what something looks like on paper. It's about what it sounds like, and it's not like things being written down can't be valuable. Like you could read an interview with, I love that book, Notes and Tones, and that, there's so many great interviews in there. And of course you can read an interview with a great musician and that can impact you, So, and of course you can learn a solo from sheet music, and in a way it's fine as well. But I think the thing is that music is, it's sound, and so I think it's just the most effective way to learn is by doing things orally, by ear, as much as possible. Of course, like when you're new to something, let's say you're just getting into jazz, that's not always possible. Like you have to also be pragmatic and realistic. Like if you're trying to teach someone a song, it might be too difficult for them at the beginning to learn it all by ear, Like I remember I remember a really clear memory of this when I was just starting at music college. And everyone knew the song, Charlie Parker song, Billy's Bounce. It's a really famous, really well-known jazz head, bebop head. And I remember, I thought, right, I got to go away and learn this by ear. And I found it so hard, Like learning something like that by ear now would take me, I'm not saying it'd be like 2 minutes, but it would be quick, and maybe I'd have to just pay attention to like little nuances in the head and stuff, but I could do it very quickly because my ears are now familiar with that sound. But I found it so difficult, and I wonder if maybe it would have been equally effective to look at the score and then just sing it, so you have to be pragmatic, that it's not that you have to learn everything by ear, because that can be very, very slow and maybe become unenjoyable. But ultimately, in the long term, doing things by ear is the most meaningful, important way of learning things. In general, I say it's never helpful to have one rule which you have to use for everything, because there's plenty of music where the great musicians are, my heroes wouldn't just learn it by ear. They'd learn something from a sheet. But in general, approaching the music as much by ear as possible, that's going to be the most effective way to learn, in the long run.
How do you develop a sense of form and cycle?
Great question. Yeah, wow, great question. I think it all comes from the melody. Now, if we're just talking about jazz standards, for example, the best way to always is think about the melody. You know, that's one of those things I learned with Ari Honig. You know, he said always sing the melody as you're going. You know, whatever crazy stuff's going on, just have the melody in your head. And in a way, he has some great phrase. I'm gonna screw it up. You know, if you know the song, you can't go wrong. You know, it's something like that. And it's so true that the melody, always have the melody very clearly in your head, you know. And most jazz standards, and of course, once you've learned a few standards, you're going to see the same forms. Like when you learn a blues, for example, you begin off, once you've learned a few blueses, you feel that intuitive sense of what 12 bars is, you know. Like if it's, for example, let's say at the gig tonight, Connor brought an 11-bar blues. I actually have one Charlie Parker arrangement, which is 11.5-bar blues. So it's just the last bar is just 2/4 bar, right? And to me, it fits perfectly with the melody. So that's why I did it. It wasn't to try and be clever. It just fits with the melody. And so because it fits with the melody, I think people could learn it quite quickly, you know? Like, so when I was trying to learn that, for example, like at the end of the song, your listeners can excuse my terrible singing, but hopefully it gives you a demonstration. So the end of the song goes da ba da ba da ba da ba da da, right? And so the original is like da ba da ba da ba ba da da ba 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 da ba da da, and so my one just went ba ba da ba da ba da ba da da, and that's beat one. Okay, so because of that, now so when I was playing at the start, I was like, oh, this feels so weird having this 2/4 bar. But if I had the melody in my head, then I always felt sure of where I was, you know. And if you learn, if you've learned I Got Rhythm, you're going to learn that feeling of A, the structure of the song, you know. And then so many other songs have that format, A, you know. So it's just about learning as many songs as possible, I think, and internalizing the melody, and then you're going to get familiar with the structure, the harmonic rhythm, the shape, you know. For me, the most clear thing is always just have the melody in your head. And it's not like when I'm soloing that I'm thinking, it's not like I'm singing the melody in my head at the same time. It's like an intuitive sense. And so, you know, if you're listening to this and you're thinking that sounds very complicated, it's not actually complicated at all. It's just that once you know the song very well, it will be in your head. It's not that I'm singing the melody of the song at the same time as soloing. I think that, you know, but it's intuitively the melody is in my, you know, in my subconscious or whatever, and that I know it well. Of course, if you're new to doing this, it's not going to be the first song you learn, even if you learn it perfectly and you learn it really well, that it's going to feel like that, you know. And sometimes, for example, like, you know, sometimes the beginner songs that students learn, like All the Things You Are, for example, those are actually quite hard songs, you know, a lot of key changes, you know, and they're not, even though the melody is so easy, you might be like, okay, I can sing the melody, but like, so maybe, for example, that song go one step further, learn the words as well as the melody, because maybe the melody is quite repetitive, so maybe that will help. Maybe that will help like ground the shape of the song, is like where the words are, you know. And yeah, you know, so it's not going to be if you haven't done this before, the first song you learn, just learn the melody doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it perfectly. But if you approach it like that for a long time, you're going to get used to that feeling, that intuitive feeling that, you know, the melody is kind of always there with you, you know.
Yeah, and you know where you are in the melody.
Exactly, right. And if, for example, a great example is gets the drum solo, right? Let's say the drummer's soloing unaccompanied, you know, whatever they're doing, however crazy it is, if I'm just going da ba 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 in my head, however crazy what they're doing is, as long as I'm singing that in my head and I'm listening to them, because, you know, they might change something or something might change, as long as I'm, you know, listening to the music in the moment, then I'm not going to be lost, you know. If you have the song, you can't go wrong.
Even when Ari plays.
It's essential when Ari plays, yeah. And when Ari's playing, you know, when you're playing songs with Ari, like that gig you came to, when Ari has these great ways of arranging standards. They'll have little hits, little moments. So these extra things you add. So like, of course I get lost when I play with Ari. It happens the whole time. But that's the thing. You'll always have the song and then just keep listening. So it's that skill to have the song in your head and listen at the same time, and you know that everyone can develop that. It's not, I'm not having no natural talent for it, just develops by doing it, by playing with other musicians. Then yeah, like that skill of being able to listen at the same time. Then if you do get a bit lost, you'll find yourself again. Yeah.
How do you make technical work more enjoyable or playful?
Another really good question. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure many people, the people think about how to do that. I don't spend much time. I don't spend much time thinking about technique in general. There are some exceptions with that, which are with the right hand techniques, specific right hand techniques. But normally what I do then is I'll just try and write like a short song or something. I actually did it this morning, like just before I came here. I woke up a bit before my alarm, and I don't know why, but I played the guitar for 10 minutes, and there's a new technique I've been working on a little bit with my right hand. And so I just wrote like a short melody. It's only 1 bar long. So it's nothing, it's not a song, but it's like a riff, let's say, just to make it memorable. But in terms of, I don't do very much practice where it's like I'm practicing arpeggios and scales. Arpeggios a little bit, but it's normally just by learning other things. It's normally by like trying to like transcribe something, or sometimes if I'm working on anything, I will compose something. So I'll almost compose a riff or like 1 or 2 bars of a solo to try and like, again, like every instrument has their own unique things. Like for guitar, sometimes there can be these challenges like coordination between the two hands. Like if you're sweeping down with your right hand, it can be a coordination thing with your left hand to make sure that that's moving at exactly the same moment so the notes sound connected. So, sometimes I'll just write a short like 1 bar phrase out to practice it, for example, But if you learn a lot of melodies, like by playing lots of bebop melodies, you kind of just come across those things. So if you want to play Donna Lee perfectly, that's going to help your technique, So normally it's just there's enough music out there that just by learning it and learning it really well, your technique's going to improve,
Would you recommend transcribing full solos or focusing on specific phrases or licks?
My gut feeling would be that actually, if we go back to something we said earlier, if you're listening to this and there's a solo you love, just learn it. I'll learn the whole thing. But also, if you're listening to a solo and you like it, but there's a couple of phrases you're like, oh, I love that. That's incredible. What's going on there? Let me investigate that. There's nothing wrong with doing that either, And both things are going to be hugely beneficial if you do them well. So I wouldn't say there's one rule for either. Both are going to be great, I think the danger of just doing whole solos is that if you learn, like 3 choruses of a solo, how much time, and you just learn it, like it's going to take a lot of time just to learn that, and maybe, which is fantastic, but if maybe it's hard to then go as deep into that as you would just if you take one idea. So for example, sometimes I'll take, and I've done this with solos from Sonny Stitt or John Coltrane or Charlie Parker, I'll just take 1 bar and I'll have that bar for like weeks or a month, and so it's more about me think how I can explain this without playing it. Like, if you play like, let's say I transcribe a phrase from Sonny Stitt. I sometimes use this example when I'm teaching, actually. I'll learn the phrase, but if I really want to have freedom with it, and let's say I want it to become part of my language, then I should really learn it in a way where I almost forget what it is, and I'm improvising with it myself, So I'll often try and take the key ideas, So I'll take one idea, like let's say the way he plays on a dominant chord, and I'll try and adapt it and change it and explore it until the point where I've almost forgotten the original, but it's kind of constantly unfolding. And 1 or 2 bars of music, you could work on that for a year. Really, I mean, if you can work on your whole life, So it's better. For me, I found more recently, it's been better to like just take 1 or 2 ideas I like, and sometimes they're just my own ideas. They're not even ideas from transcriptions, and really work on them repetitively, trying to get them into my ear, trying to get them under my fingers, trying to work out how I can include them in arrangements or comping or soloing. But it just be driven by, if you're excited by learning a whole solo, then you should do that, 100%.
I've noticed you quote a lot of saxophonists.
Yes, yeah.
Is that your main source of inspiration?
That's probably, I would say I mean, for me, I always loved the way I mean, especially for like straight ahead, jazz, like especially for bebop, I always just loved the way the saxophone sounded for that. To me, it always sounded the most natural in a way, the most vocal. Recently I've been transcribing a bit more trumpet, and again, like there are all these little different nuances. But it's true that I would have probably transcribed saxophone more than anything else, just because I did loads of Charlie Parker solos, when I was at college, and John Coltrane as well. I often found lots of his solos fit very well on the guitar. The ones I really studied. So I don't know, just for that kind of music, to me, nothing. I mean, there's lots of great, but saxophone always sounded so great in that context. I loved, for that style of jazz, like nothing beats Charlie Parker if you love bebop, really. Or Lester Young, for pre-bebop, or Sonny Rollins. I love as well. I mean, it's just I guess that's just what excited me the most. For that style. For more contemporary things, it's probably been transcribing guitar more. I don't transcribe that much, like, I did at college, but like Kurt Rosenwinkel. When I was at college, I did some Kurt Rosenwinkel solos, or trying to think who else. Chris Potter, I guess, about saxophone. But yeah, Brad Meldau, some things. But there's a couple of Aaron Park solos. I studied piano. Some Brad solos as well. But yeah, for traditional jazz, I think saxophone always just felt like it kind of inspired me the most.
How do you teach to your students really hard chord progressions like giant steps?
Yeah,
or songs like that.
Yeah, I think it's a bit this. I mean, those are the things that I find difficult. So when I'm learning songs like that, the first thing I tell students is, particularly if they're. I actually was teaching a student yesterday who's applying for they have to do for a master's audition, they have to do Moment's Notice. So we were just talking about it. We were just they're already a good player. They're already at university, but they're trying to they want to do an audition, and so we were talking about. And I said to them, listen, just want to be totally honest with you. I find songs like this hard if I haven't practiced them. So just sometimes to remind people, it's not like most people. There are some like people who are very talented, but I'm not really one of them. So for me, it's been really practicing and studying the song really hard, really, really hard. I mean, a song like Giant Steps, to me, that's not that difficult in a way, because it to me, it's quite obvious, like, or self-explanatory how to solo on it, in the sense it's not easy to do it. It's hard to do it, but it's kind of self-explanatory. All the chords are the same. It's all 1 and 5, And so let's say you're at home and you're trying to learn Giant Steps, listen to John Coltrane, ba ba da ba da ba da ba da, listen, all the phrases are so clear, like, and we were listening to the Moment's Notice solo yesterday, da ba da ba ba da ba da da. Just listen. He's just playing incredibly clear language, which is outlining what's going on, but in a way where it's always there's always a nice unfolding element to it. So to me, those songs actually, it's quite clear how you play on them. It's just that it takes a lot of time for your brain and your ear to kind of be able to do it quickly. That's the hard thing. But if you play it slowly, so I guess I would say, okay, if you're brand new to it, take the first 4 bars of the solo, sing it, play the chords, play the solo along with the recording. How about then taking the ideas from bar 3 and 4 and put them in bar 1 and 2 and swap, take the simple ways he's doing he's doing very clear things, like that first phrase, da ba da ba da ba 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 ba. Those are very clear things, like super clear where the 5 is and where the 1 is, And so, yeah, just like internalizing how to do that. I mean, that's the hard thing, is doing it at speed, is to doing it quickly on the gig. Listen, if I played that tune tonight and it was really fast, I probably haven't worked it for a minute, so my brain would be like not quite in that space. But I certainly, I recorded one of those tunes before. It's quite a long time ago now. I guess it's 4 years ago. I don't actually love the solo that much. It's on Satellite, and that's the record I did with Ari. But I remember being very disciplined about practicing I guess I would hope it'd be a lot better, but being very clear about practicing like just very clear, strong sounds which outline the changes, you know? And then, okay, so if I'm using that first idea when it goes from F sharp 7 to B7, I can use that same sound when it goes from D7 to G, you know? And then, if I'm using a different idea from the D7 to the G, well, I can use that on the F sharp to the B, you know? Does that make sense? Like sorry, it's easier if I play on the guitar, obviously, but it's, yeah, like, and then if you keep practicing like that with clear ideas, like if you keep practicing like that every day for a few weeks, you're going to start having loads of vocabulary, you know? What John Coltrane mastered there was like the ability to improvise so fluidly, but with a very strict set of language, you know? And he only played those tunes on that recording. There's no other versions of it, you know? So he obviously worked at it. Well, I say obviously, I never asked him, and I don't know if there's any interviews with him about it. I don't think so from what I've tried to find. But, you know, he obviously works at it incredibly diligently for a period and then learned how to do that and then moved on from it, you know? And all of us, all these years later, are still struggling with it, you know? Yeah.
You have a jam session or recording anecdote you'd like to share?
Yes, I like this one. This is nice. I remember, because it links back to something we were talking about earlier. I'd forgotten about this. It's good you asked. That I mentioned I was doing that tour with Bill McHenry and Jeff Williams, and we played in London. And after us, there was a jam session. And one of the great saxophonists around today, Alex Garnett, he got up. He was hosting the jam session, and he played. I think it was Have You Met Miss Jones? Although this is like 8 years ago, so it's a long time, and it was like 1 a.m. And I remember he played the first 4 bars just of the melody, not solo. And I remember Bill said to me, "Wow, this guy's incredible." And so to me, it just struck me so much. He could tell straight away by just the way he played the first few notes of the melody, and in a difficult setting because it was like a very late. Kind of the band was probably a bit like ropey, and I liked that. It always reminds me, whenever I hadn't thought about that for a while, but it always reminds me that, you know, a great musician like that, even in those tough circumstances, the strength of their musicality could come through, you know. So that's a nice one. Lots of horrible jam experiences, you know, like when I first moved to London. You know, I didn't really know many people. We used to go to jam sessions, and you know, they're tough experiences, like really hard. I remember that probably, particularly like just things like playing standards. I was probably not quite so comfortable doing that as I am now. Like I you know, hadn't developed those skills so much, and so I often would go to the jam sessions and not sound so good, or I'd be very unhappy how I sounded, and I found those things really hard. You know, I remember it really, like, it made me really sad when I first moved to London. Like the first year, a lot of the playing I was doing was just at jam sessions, you know, and I guess I look back now and I wish I could have just enjoyed it more and just been like, listen, it doesn't really matter how you sound. Don't put so much pressure on it. Of course, when you care about music so much, like everyone, like I do and you do and all the listeners do, it's sometimes hard to be so removed from that, you know. But yeah, jam sessions can be tough, you know. So one nice story and one more serious one.
Which musicians would you most like to play with?
I think it would be amazing to play with Christian McBride. That would be because he has when you hear him, I've seen him live several times, and when you hear him on record or live, it's always so clear straight away it's him. And I'd love to have that feeling, you know, like what that feels like to play on top of that, you know. I would love that. And I would love to play with Gregory Hutchinson. Greg Hutchinson, the drummer. I love listening to him. And yeah, those two spring to mind.
How do you see the impact of YouTube and social media on jazz education?
I would say YouTube is good overall, actually. I was thinking about this. I was just teaching when I was on this tour a few days last week. I was teaching at in Finland at a university, and they were asking, one of the questions was about social media. And I actually think YouTube overall, of course it's not perfect, but I think YouTube is, I think in general it's a force for good. because there's so much music on there, and live concerts, sessions, like bootlegs, so much music. So I think YouTube is amazing, and I think if you're a student of jazz and I'm a student of jazz, but like if you're, for me now, I'll often watch a video on YouTube and just sit down and want to like listen to it more or learn it. So I think it's incredible. I think social media is more difficult because I think it's also true that there's great musicians sharing stuff on social media, but it's less. I think YouTube, people go on there and watch stuff seriously. I think social media it's more. I think there's just so much rubbish on there. There's rubbish on YouTube too, but you're not. I feel like it's not so intense in terms of how rubbish it is. And I think when I was at college, there was no Instagram, I mean, if there was, I didn't have it anyway, or it was in the early stages. And Facebook, people did have Facebook, but it wasn't the same in the way of it. Like, it's very vulgar and I think Instagram and TikTok and those kind of things I mean, I use Instagram a lot, for a touring musician, it's important, but, and I like to share what I'm doing with people there. But I think overall, it's that's a complicated thing, and I think people need to be careful not to spend too much time on it, me included.
What advice would you give to a beginner and to a more advanced student?
I think, well, for beginner, just find the things that you really like. Find something you really like, which is within your realms of playing. And that might be if you're really just a total beginner, there's always going to be something you can play to some degree, like some simple thing you can do. So just and find maybe find a teacher, and just try and learn something, like and really just enjoy it, do it for enjoyment. And really the same for the more advanced student. Try and be driven by what excites you, but try and find that, like I think I referenced this earlier, try and dig deep into the things you really like. So it's not just like, let's say you learn a solo by Brad Meldau, don't just learn it, like try and dig into what excites you about it, like, or the things Brad does which make you like the solo, so be stimulated and moved by the, and be drawn to the things you really want to do, but then put work into really like establishing why that is. And be driven by what you're passionate by, but also try and dig deeper into what that is, like what makes Brad a great musician in the same way that Wynton Kelly or Art Tatum, what are the common similarities, strengths among these great musicians? Even if you're driven to Brad and not so much some of the other ones, try and find those common themes, which I guess would be great timing, expression, sound, ideas, all those things, and try and begin to integrate that into your playing.
What's your view of today's jazz scene and the new generation of players? And do you think jazz was better in the old days?
Well, I don't think, in terms of was jazz better in the old days, I don't think it can really be better than it was. Like, it's not like, when you hear Lester Young or Charlie Parker or Sonny Rollins or Art Tatum, it's not like music is going to be better than that, It's like saying, is Beethoven better than Bach, or or Mahler better than Beethoven, or and I think that the authenticity of it, like I guess, African American music played by African Americans, or it's especially in that period culturally, you can't beat that. It's because it's so much more than just music. To me, it's the most significant art form of the 20th century. And so you can't. It's never going to be better than it was when it was in its prime. But I also don't like to think that it can't be kind of as good. And to me, lots of my favorite jazz is made by modern musicians, Kurt Rosenwinkel, Aaron Parks, people like that. I love their music as much as I love listen to Charlie Parker, you know. And to me, those great people, they stand up to the masters of the past. You know, they are, I mean, so I don't think it needs to be one or the other. It's also about how music unfolds and represents the environment we are in at the moment, you know. And as I say, like when you know, I was just re-listening to Love Supreme. I hadn't listened to that for ages. You can't top that in terms of the artistic expression, because it's not just about the playing, but it's about the cultural significance, the emotion. You can't, as a musician, you can't fake that, you know. And certainly the experience of, you know, especially the experience of African American musicians is something I've never, you know, my privilege and, you know, security and stuff. Those things mean that I can't ever express that music in the same way. So I have to, you know, you have to embrace yourself, your own individuality. And so I don't think it can ever, what we do now can never top that. But I also do think people are making beautiful music now, and emotional music, and which stands up, you know, stands up to those greats, and that should be celebrated. You know, it's because I said earlier, music is a wonderful thing which makes all of our lives better. And so I also don't like that sometimes there is maybe too much pessimism about, oh, jazz was only good before, it can't be good now. I definitely feel like, as I said, there are people now who are making incredible music which really stands up and should stand to the test of time. So it's just different, I guess, and constantly changing, you know.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
For your
I hope
time.
my answers weren't too long, but very good questions.